Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. We have something absolutely insane today, and it is a bunch of leaks based around what nations are going to come to where. And this supposedly comes from BVVD, or at least parts of it come from BVVD, who is the creative kind of director of War Thunder, so the big honcho, the big boy that you see on the Russian streams when it comes to the sneak peek stuff. It is kind of insane the amount of information that we have in this, and it also comes from an area of the leak guys, which generally isn't wrong. So in this video, we're going to go through a multitude of different subtrees that are planned, and also vehicles, plus some even changes like an economy rework in 2025, which will change the way you get SL, and unfortunately look like nerf it. It's going to be a bit nuts if all of this comes true, because this really is a massive leak of so many things. And if this is something which has got out, then there's got to be like an email chain or something crazy that people have got access to. So as always, if you enjoy the content, make sure to subscribe to the channel. I'll leave a link in the description to the War Thunder Snailmine Discord, and also, let's get into it. So the first piece of the leaks is about China, and this is from multiple sources that BVVD plans to implement a new subtree for China, and it looks like it's going to be Singapore of all nations, which will be interesting to put in. I'm sure there'll be some interesting comments about this, but it's also something that does make a lot of sense. There is also a potential addition to the Chinese tech tree for the ASEAN, which is the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. So it looks like they're just throwing them all into China, apart from Thailand, because Thailand is going to go to Japan, which we've talked about previously. Now, who is in the Association of Southeast Asian Nations? It is Indonesia, Vietnam, Laos, Brunei, Thailand, Myanmar, the Philippines, Cambodia, Singapore, and also Malaysia. So quite a lot of nations going into China. We've talked about it before, where a lot of tech trees in War Thunder are going to become these kind of like multi-country tech trees, and we've already seen it with Sweden, with Britain, and also with Italy. China is also going to be the same. They already technically are with the PLA and the ROC stuff, with Taiwan and also mainland China, and now they're going to expand it even further. China is one of those nations that is ripe for new subtech trees because of their relationships with all over the world right now, whether it is in Asia or even in Africa, since they've put down a lot of roots in areas like that too. So we're going to see this happen over time. And the fact that the first one that they're going to start with is Singapore is, as I said, kind of surprising to me, but not a huge surprise because of their ties, especially politically. The major issue with that is, of course, what would Singapore have access to, which would actually benefit the Chinese tech tree. Places like the Philippines and also Indonesia have a lot of interesting vehicles that can go in, but the question is, what can you put from other areas? And the fact that Pakistan also isn't on the list is also kind of surprising too. But we'll have to see what goes on with that. Now, there is also leaks for other subtrees that are coming, and once again, this is for far into the future. So this isn't something which is just being planned for the next update or even the next series of updates. This could come in 4 or 5 or even 10 years, depending on how they set things up. Understand that when it comes to War Thunder, and also just a lot of businesses that revolve around specific products, these ideas are planned way into the future. So they have meetings, they create a general structure for the next 5 years on what they want to see, and then you have, of course, different parts which change depending on which updates they're going for. But the general plan is always laid out way in advance, which is why we can see stuff from ages away. Now, these all have high probabilities of happening, since one of the things that Gaijin wants to focus on is subtech trees and also just adding in more nations into the game. So first of all, you have North Korea being added to China, which of course is the easiest or the most sane option. North Korea has a lot of Chinese equipment that they use, and also closest relations with them because of their connectivity and also their political prowess. So it wouldn't be too surprising at all to see that happen. South Korea going to America, which once again makes the most sense because of the fact that South Korea have very, very strong ties to America. And if you know anything about the Korean War, you can kind of understand why this has set up the way it has. Switzerland, obviously going to Germany, which is something we already see happening right now, but we'll see in a much larger way in the future. Something that shouldn't be too surprising going forward. And then also Iran being added to Russia. This is a relationship that isn't really talked about so much, at least in the news that's around here, but Iran actually has some pretty strong ties to Russia, not just through equipment, but also through general political relationships. So it would not be a surprise either to see this happen. Iran has a ton of interesting machines. We obviously just recently got the F-14 for Iran, and the interesting thing that Gaijin do is they throw in these event vehicles, they throw in these squadron vehicles, they throw in these premiums to see how many people are interested in those specific nations, and then they go full force into it. This is what happened with South Africa, with stuff like the Roycat, for example, the Roycat 76. This happened with the Makava for Israel. This happened with stuff like, of course, the F-14 for the Americans, and also other nations. Even stuff like the STRV, which was firstly into the British tree with the SS-11s, I believe they are, or they might be different ATGMs, but then it was moved over to the Swedish tree. So they're trying to gauge how much people are interested in these things, and once they find out, oh, turns out people are interested, all right, let's put in the money, let's build the models, let's get going. And that's why it's very important to look at these kind of like off-key random vehicles like the Bhishma, for example, or the Vijayanta for India in the British tech tree. If stuff like that does really well, then they're going to put a ton of resources into there, and that's kind of what you see. The other part, which is kind of crazy, is first of all a Polish tech tree, which is something we've talked about quite a lot, and I know there's a lot of people from Poland who are really interested in seeing a Polish tech tree, but also an Eastern European subtree. Now this one is the one which is going to be very interesting to see what goes around, because where do you put an Eastern European subtree? My guess would be you put it into the Polish one, because if you put it in the Russian one, and I know we've talked about before, War Thunder is an apolitical entity, so is Gaijin, but let's be honest, if they decided to do that and put in a lot of the ex-Soviet countries into Russia, you're just going to cause something that you just don't want to deal with. So it would make much more sense if they created a Polish tech tree and then pumped in all of those other nations. And that looks like what they're doing. So for example, you have the Polish tech tree, which would have access to Czechia, or the Czech Republic, and then also Slovakia, Ukraine, then you have Belarus, and then Slovenia, the good old Croatians, and also the Romanians. So all of these nations are being worked on. All of them will be added into the game. The only question is, how do you add them in? And then also there is an idea of a new EU subtree, which I don't know how that's going to work, but I think in general that is going to be pretty interesting. So yeah, that's another part of it, which will be really cool. There's also a EU subtree would probably be like Spain, Portugal, some of the Scandi boys, also some of the Central European powers like Greece, for example, and that would mean that you've pretty much covered the globe in terms of tech trees to be added. And the only area that isn't covered is, of course, Africa. Africa hasn't really been looked at, it seems, so far, but Africa does have quite a lot of interesting stuff. So all of those are incredibly high on the probability chart and confirmed by some sources around Gaijin themselves, which is just crazy. The other part, of course, as we said, stuff like Indonesia, stuff like good old Singapore going to China, and to see what vehicles they're going to have, that's going to be nuts as well. But just understand, these are things that are not just all going to come at once. They're not all going to come in the next few updates. This is a long time period type of deal. So you're talking 3, 5, 10 years, as I said. It's nuts to think about what's going to come in. So a lot of different tech trees, a lot of different sub-tech trees, and just a ton of different nations represented, which I think will hopefully make people happy. There's also a bunch of other leaks that we will have a look at too in a separate video, just because it makes more sense to put it into there, because it's more kind of stuff which is coming soon. But my god, isn't it insane how much content is still there for War Thunder to add. And I'm hoping that what they will do in the future is start thinking about how to bring in a bunch of the same vehicles, but also at the same time try and make it so the economy follows it too. Because if they don't do that, and they bring in a lot of copy-paste stuff, which, let's be honest, a lot of these nations have access to, we're going to have a bit of a problem, and people are going to get sick of it. So I'm sure they're thinking about that. I'm sure they're thinking on how to fix that, because that is the biggest issue at this moment. What a crazy leak it is. As always, I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. I'd just like to thank GMG Smiley, CD Beans, Chieftain Mike, EMN3 Galaxy, Tulio Pontecorvo, Brendan Quinn, Carrion Crow, Gus Irenicus, Pyman, Wartinder, Teddy, Daniel Stanton, Martinez, B. Young, Ozzy Panzer, Alan Hacker, Liam Shear, Opium Prime, Lafouche, Sem, Aslan, Uncle Bean, and Derek R. for supporting the channel.